Hi, I'm saraaguilar, co-founder of LIV NRG, and today I have the pleasure of speaking to Nasha Winters, naturopathic doctor who combines Eastern and Western medicine to create metabolic therapies for cancer. Now this interview in particular is going to be so important for energy production, understanding the mitochondria, and that it literally relates to how energized you feel and how you're metabolizing energy in the body. We're going to look at autophagy, cellular healing, and the relationship with cancer, and ketosis and the ketogenic diet and how that can benefit you as a more clean, fueling energy source. Nasha has an amazing story on how she cured her own cancer, and I would love to hear more about that from you.
Sure. Well, first of all, thank you. This is so fun, and I love that we get to be outdoors at an ancestral health conference. This makes sense versus being under all the fake lights, which are actually very dangerous to our mitochondria. So I am here with you today because I learned about how to address my own metabolic disruption from learning from some old textbooks from the 1920s and 30s that happened to highlight the work of Otto Warburg, who in the late 1920s won a Nobel Prize for his work in metabolic patterns and energy patterns of the mitochondria. And for any of your listeners, you know, when we started talking about mitochondria, most of you remember being in maybe 6th grade, where you talked about these little organelles that live within each of our cells. That is basically the power station, the factory where our energy is made inside of these little organisms called the mitochondria. And Dr. Warburg and others at that time started to realize that disease didn't come first. It was the breakdown of those organelles that led to disease states. And so basically what that translates to in the most simple terms is the fuel we burn as in ourselves. So what I was figuring out for myself at almost 19 years old, I'd basically had terrible health from the second I entered and took my first breath in this world, with layers and layers of Western medical interventions and inability to digest most foods that I took in. We didn't understand that probably being on a soy formula was not a great idea for me at that time.
But you were put on a soy formula?
Oh, heck yeah, because in 1971, that's aging me a bit here, but in 1971, for some reason, breast was not best at that time.
That's when they promoted the powdered milks, didn't they?
Exactly. Yeah. There was like a whole generation of us who were not offered breast milk. So they started out with all the typical, you know, like, okay, we're going to put her on cow milk, you know, baby formulas, and I was allergic to all of them. And the one that they settled on for me was a soy formulation, which it wasn't a surprise then. At age 9, I started menstruating. By age 12, I was diagnosed with endometriosis, polycystic ovarian syndrome.
Young.
Exactly. I mean, there's a nightmare of hormonal issues that compounded the nightmare of digestive issues I experienced on a daily basis. I didn't know what feeling good was like. I didn't know. A little TMI, but the doctors told my mother that it was normal that I only had a bowel movement once a month, because that was my normal. They said, well, she goes every month, so that's normal. Hopefully you and your listeners are realizing
such a low standard. I mean, it's all maintaining sickness rather than raising health.
That's an exact way. Yeah. They're like, well, she's like comfortable in her.
She's alive. It's okay.
There's a couple breaths coming out of her. It wasn't until after 6-7 months of being in and out of ERs at the age of 19, almost 20 years old, that I had a very thoughtful physician who, when I landed in the ER, tachycardic, an end organ failure with 8 liters of fluid on my abdomen, that they realized I was an end stage organ failure secondary to stage 4 ovarian cancer. It was a little bit of a shock to everybody, including the doctor who gave me that diagnosis, who bawled hysterically because he had a daughter my age. And so for him, it hit very much to home. And he basically said even a single dose of standard of care therapy right now would outright kill you because your organs aren't working. They're not filtering and doing their job. So I was basically put on palliative hospice care. And even though I had a second opinion a few days later with an oncologist, they had the same feeling outside of making me comfortable by taking away the fluid. That's basically all they could offer. And we had a confirmation of the diagnosis at that time. And really, I was sent out on my own. And for you and your listeners, you know, what's important for me to let people know is that sometimes when you're given no way, all the opportunities open up for you.
Then you've got to work something out then, don't you?
Exactly.
It's like you've exhausted all Western possibilities, so what's the last resort?
Exactly. And for me, I didn't expect to live. I had no illusion that I was going to fight this. I had no illusion that I was going to kick this, but I had the illusion or the belief system that I was going to learn everything that I could and I was going to go out fighting. And that's how I stumbled across the crazy work of Otto Warburg and started to sort of reverse engineer my process. Because I understood from reading in that literature that I had been giving my body the wrong fuel sources for a very long time. And I knew that just like gas in a car, the only way to get my engine to keep on moving down the road was to give it cleaner gas and clean up the engine and clean up the motor that was wrapped around it. That was something that just I was intuitive about. There was nobody in 1991 talking about this. Okay, this data was buried. There was no Dr. Google. I mean, heck, I worked in a library. We had the Dewey Decimal System. You probably don't even know what that is.
No, I don't.
Okay. And so it was a very, you know, like microfiche is where you looked at your research, for crying out loud. It was a very archaic time. I will also say that was actually my gift as well, because I also didn't have all the bad, ill advice swirling around me. So I had to really go inward, and I had to trust on some data points that resonated with me. And because there were no options given to me, I had to figure them out for myself. Fast forward to almost 28 years later, obviously I'm still alive. I would hope that that's obvious.
You've done an absolutely brilliant job of figuring it out.
And I'm still figuring it out because I did not ever do standard of care. I did not have surgery, I did not have chemo, I did not have radiation. That is not what I would advocate for everybody else. That was my experience, my body, my process. And a lot goes into what I do to maintain this, in that I'm not considered cured. I know you use those words early on in the beginning of this discussion, but honestly, I don't believe anybody is cured of cancer. There's no such thing. We all have cancer cells. We can look around this huge campus of people walking past. And they're waiting for the signals that our body gives them, primarily from the mitochondria powerhouses that are within each of our cells. They're listening very actively to what information, whether it's food, water, air, chemicals, thoughts, impact its expression and impact its energy level. So that being said, when I started this process for myself, I had no expectations. And all of these years later, my only expectation is how to keep learning and looking under the hood and digging deeper and optimizing my mitochondrial function. And that does mean on all levels, mentally, physically, emotionally, and spiritually, on a daily basis. We have an opportunity to change our trajectory, to change our outcomes, to change our statistics, and to change how we feel every single moment. It's a choice.
On the mitochondria and producing energy in the body, what was going on when you talk about clean energy? What do you mean by giving yourself clean burning energy for mitochondria?
Perfect. Well, first of all, very quickly, the nutrients in our body that our mitochondria primarily use are glucose from carbohydrates, starches, straight up sugar, and fats, fatty acids from, olive oil, coconut oil, avocados, lard, cheese, eggs. Those are the food choices that our mitochondria use. And it can use either one, no problem. And it can make a certain number of ATPs at the end of every cycle of the Krebs cycle, which is this little sort of assembly line going on in our cells every moment of every moment of our lives. Within millions of mitochondria, trillions actually. I mean, just to give you an example, we have mitochondria basically in every cell and every tissue and every organ of our body, except for the red blood cells. Okay, and so really where we will see mitochondria most sequestered are in big energy sink areas, such as our brain, our liver, our heart, our muscle. Those are the areas where we have the most vast amount of mitochondria. And we have them in the other places too, but that should give you a clue that those are areas that demand a lot of energy to just stay alive, to just do its daily job. So when I think back to what I was learning for myself, the energy, yes, I was giving the energy that it could use, glucose primarily. My diet was incredibly atrocious, what we call the standard American diet, which is basically the standard world, global diet today. We're moving, unfortunately, our bad ideas around the rest of the world. But basically, I was a latchkey kid. My mom worked several jobs to help my brother and I survive, and we were living on fast food and really cheap processed food because we were very poor, and everything came from a box or a can or a baggie, and it came from a factory, not a farm. It did not come from nature. It did not come from its original source. And it was incredibly carbohydrate laden.
And nutrient deficient.
Extremely.
And I think with lots of those foods, instead of giving you energy that your mitochondria can use, it depletes your energy.
Totally.
So there's calories,
Yep.
but there's no, the mitochondria can't use that for energy.
You got it. And it can, but it does it very inefficiently and ineffectively, to the point where, just like if you drive your car down the road, you can get down the road if you throw a couple pounds of sugar into the gas tank, but it starts to kind of sputter and become inefficient and break down on the side of the road. That's what happens to us. We oxidize over time, and we break down if we keep feeding it too much of a single energy source.
What happens exactly through the oxidization process?
Yeah,
So
yeah.
when you say oxidize, what does that mean?
It's basically we rust on the inside of our body, okay?
So a high glucose diet and processed foods, you're literally causing oxidation inside of your body, i.e. rusting.
Yeah, we are
breaking
rusting.
down, degenerating.
Exactly, exactly. So when I hear 40-year-olds say, I'm fatigued, but it's just my age, I wanna punch them in their mitochondria. And I mean that lovingly, because it's about, fatigue is the #1 first symptom of mitochondrial damage. And so if you're a 16-year-old dealing with fatigue, which we're seeing more and more of today, and you're a 47-year-old dealing with fatigue, you gotta look at the source of your mitochondria. What fuel are you giving those mitochondria? And so prior to 1850, we were all low carb, okay? We think this is a fad, we think this is a trend today, but at that time, about 30% of our caloric intake came from our sugars, our starches, our fruit, our honey, all right? And we had to work very hard to even access those carbohydrates.
Naturally sourced sugars and
exactly.
carbohydrates.
They weren't like wrapped up in Twinkies and Ho-Hos. That was not what was happening then. And so at that time, we were getting a nice combination of good proteins and fats and sugars. But after 1850s, when we started to mill sugar and flour into everything, and our nature is that sugar hits dopamine in our brain, no different than cocaine.
So addictive.
It is so addictive, more so, I think, than some of these drugs that we're so concerned about.
Oh, yeah.
It's like the legal street drug, and we don't call it what it is. And so today, between 70 and 80% of our caloric intake worldwide is our carbohydrates. And so that mitochondrial process that, yes, it can use that sugar energy to produce ATP, to produce the energy of life, it also becomes less and less efficient and rusts more. And just like a rusty engine, the parts aren't going to work as well in the future, and it's going to give out much sooner than what you expect. But when we can give it an alternate fuel source, especially because we're all kind of jammed in sugar burning state, but if you can come in and forcibly intervene with a fatty acid burning state, some people need to do that therapeutically, like 90% of their caloric intake being fat, for instance, or even intermittent fasting, anywhere from 13 hours to 72 hours or longer, depending what your medical needs are. You can basically start to clean out and sort of debride the gunk that's accumulated on the carburetor of our mitochondria, and make it start to function much more effectively and efficiently. And actually, interestingly enough, our body preferentially uses fat as fuel, and preferentially will use it, it'll bypass a few extra steps and be used more efficiently and effectively to churn out more energy at the end of the day.
Yeah.
So we have always had this sort of like upgraded option and choice for our cells, but when the cells get lazy or overwhelmed, they'll just kind of quickly grab up sugar.
It's just I think it's because so we've got metabolically we can use two sources of fuel, ketones or glucose, i.e. fat or sugar, carbohydrates.
Yeah.
We need, from what I understand, is that the brain prefers ketones and functions much, much better on fat, mainly with the brain is also made mostly of fat and cholesterol.
Fat heads, all of us.
And you need the essential fatty acids. And sugar is to be burned for immediate, like intense exercise. So if you're under stress, you'll release cortisol, which will trigger glucose release that you need to run away from something.
Right.
So we do need sugar for fast, speedy movements, but not if we're sitting down most of the time. We just don't need that much sugar. We don't need that kind of energy. Right. Whereas ketones burn cleaner, and being in ketosis is a therapeutic use. Like my husband has a ketogenic diet for epilepsy, and there's a lot of neurological issues that just giving your brain fats. It can work better on fats, because the reason being is that the metabolism, the mitochondria, can't use the glucose for energy. Is that right?
Well,
sometimes it just has difficulty doing so.
Exactly.
So it's like a metabolic breakdown.
Yes.
So you've got energy in your body, but you can't do anything except store it as fat.
Yeah.
And then you also get the oxidation,
the rusting.
All the sugars, the rusting.
You got it. And it's funny when you said, the brain prefers fat. It does, unless you're in an addictive state where it really craves its dopamine hit from the next fix of. And so when your folks start to lower their glucose intake, lower their carbohydrate intake, they're going to feel pretty crusty. All right, they're not going to feel well, and they're going to be cursing you and I because they're going to think we're trying to kill them. But what we're trying to do is help their bodies remember a natural state of being a hybrid engine that they always were for years. They've just had a brick on the accelerator pedal of a sugar burner for so many years that when you first lift that brick and try to become a dual purpose pedal, it feels very uncomfortable because you literally go through a withdrawal like you would coming off of cocaine or heroin. It's no different. And that makes you feel fluey and achy and grumpy, exactly, or carbohydrate withdrawal. And so I think that's a really interesting thing. And what I heard a speaker last weekend at another medical conference that I attended, he talks about today, I thought this was so elegant. He talks about today, the way we eat in a standard American diet or in the carbohydrate-rich diet that our world is leaning towards. He actually calls it a ketosis suppression diet. And I thought that was brilliant.
That is true, because it's not just bad food, but bad food all the time. So you never even have a break from being in an anabolic, building up state.
Exactly. Yeah. And we're meant to be. And the thing I started learning about my own healing process is I don't think I ever, because it also came on the heels in the 1970s, and we're like, fat is bad. Fat is bad, danger. So we started pulling out of our food sources back in the 1970s, thanks to terrible advice. Thank you, Ansel. Got a couple words with that fella. Ultimately, when you take out the fat, you take away the flavor, and you have to replace it with something, and that's gonna be sugar. And the other side of that is it got backed by corporations and industry. And that really, we're still on that train. That train is still moving very rapidly forward. And a few of us that are trying to jump off that track are belittled and ridiculed out there in the scientific community. And yet there are colleagues like myself worldwide who are finding unbelievable benefit to help people wake up their ketogenic abilities. Again, whether they're treating cancer, epilepsy, diabetes, obesity, cardiovascular disease, Alzheimer's, dementia, autism. We're seeing unbelievable research in all of these fields, basically showing that these diseases are actually mitochondrial diseases. All of them, that's the common thread. And if you then clean up the gunk in that engine, and you start to give it the right fuel sources to function either primarily, always in that state of ketosis, which some conditions like epilepsy or brain tumors might need, or to be able to easily move in and out of that state.
Which is the ideal, because that's what we're designed for.
True, especially preventatively.
Is it where we gotta go. That babies are born in ketosis?
It is. And interestingly enough, after they're born, within the first anywhere from 72 to 96 hours, they actually go into a deeper state of ketosis while the milk is coming in. And what is primarily coming in the breast milk in those first few days is actually almost all fat. And so they basically get on a super high, they come out sort of in a fasted state, because that's hard work, coming out of the body and into this world and then exposed to what you're exposed to on the other side. I'd probably want to crawl right back up there myself, but that is definitely the case. And then as we're waiting for the natural process of the breast milk to come in, that's even richer in the fats, the colostrum, which is what stokes the ketones even higher. So this is a survival mechanism for the early beings. So think about what that means for the almost 70% of children in the US being born C-section today. So we're aborting that process and basically pulling babies out that aren't having that long transition into ketosis through the canal.
And they're not having the exposure to bacteria either.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Their microbiome is not getting set, which is the first inoculation. Oftentimes, if you're born C-section, you're not being tended to by the mom right away. Mom's being tended to deal with the surgery, and you're being whisked off to have your APGAR score tested. So you're not getting that skin-to-skin contact, which is your next microbiome initiation. And then the third one is oftentimes these women, because of that sort of abrupt nature and not moving and releasing the oxytocin moving through the birth canal, there's often a lot more issues around lactation and latching issues. So then there may be difficulty in babies getting the first bit there. So we're kind of entering into the world today in so many unnatural ways that it's disrupting something that's been happening since the first humans landed on this big ball in the sky.
Yeah, and that's exactly why we're here at the Ancestral Health Symposium, because we've gone so far away from how we evolved and where we are today, and that's a lot of sickness can be the root cause. It's just man-made, it's what we're eating, it's what we're doing, how we're being born, what we're being exposed to, the lack of natural light, the electricity, terrible food. That's why we're out here right now talking about ketosis.
Yes.
I mean, for me personally, when when my husband went ketogenic, I did too, just in support.
Oh, that's awesome.
And it wasn't so hard because I was already paleo. But the thing I noticed was the focus, clarity, and energy.
Huge.
I was like, I'm Superwoman. Oh my God.
Who doesn't want to feel that on a regular basis, right?
I could just be so productive and just do so much exercise, and it was phenomenal. But why does that happen when you go into ketosis?
Such a great question. Now, what's interesting is when you think about evolutionary man, when you think about this process, we did not have a 7-Eleven or a restaurant or a grocery store open 24/7 on every corner. We had to go days or even weeks without food. And in order to be able to survive those moments of famine and lack of food in different seasons and different locations, we had to have a built-in system that kept us alive. And that was part of that dual burning system, and that was the natural state of ketosis. And ketones, this fatty acid molecule, the body uses as a primary fuel source for the brain. It will switch within 4 days of fasting. You are primarily only using ketones at that point for your brain. Your brain does not need glucose to function. Actually, nothing in your body needs glucose to function.
Because you can make glucose.
You can totally make glucose from your right knee. It's amazing how you can find resources for it. And so it's not an exogenous need.
People say that. They're like, but you can't live without carbs and you can't live without glucose.
We actually can.
Yeah. But you will degrade without fat.
Exactly.
You cannot produce fat.
Exactly.
That's why they're essential. There's no essential carbohydrates.
Exactly. That's a very good point. And so when we move into this state to think about sort of how and why this came to be, is the ketones themselves, it's almost like they take the veil away. They need to create clarity so you can be in your body, embodied enough and clear enough and aware enough and strong enough to look for your next meal. That is how this came to be. If you're out there stumbling around, if you've got blood sugar imbalances and you skip a meal in 4 hours, you're kind of a bumbling idiot. You're hangry, you're confused, your brain isn't working well, and what you're looking for is not a big scoop of coconut oil. You're looking for your cup of coffee, or you're looking for your donut to quickly recharge you.
Energy.
Right?
Yeah.
And you might feel the clouds move out of the brain for that moment, but that's not sustainable, and it will work less and less each time, just like any other drug starts to build a tolerance in your body, so does sugar. So to get the same hit, the same fix, you need more sugar. Whereas fats immediately satiate. They actually work on these other hormones in the body, these ghrelin and leptins, which are basically hunger and satiation hormones in the body, in a profound way that stabilizes them, balances them, where sugar, carbohydrates, throws them off kilter. And so when we have that ability to be clear, we're able to make better decisions in all aspects of our life. So oftentimes you're making better decisions of, hey, I'm gonna go for a walk, versus sitting on my ass and looking at Facebook for another bit of time. Just to give you an example, in the United States, the average American spends less than 15 minutes outside. Luckily, we've already gotten our fix so far today. There was a time 100 years ago, I was talking about the Little House on the Prairie. You probably don't know that either.
I do.
Good, okay.
I
Laura
do.
Ingalls Wilder, I am from Kansas, so this was part of my upbringing. But we spent an average of 4 hours walking every day, obviously outdoors, doing things like chopping water and carrying wood. You were not spending it looking for your next candy bar or your next cup of coffee. You were maybe chewing on a piece of jerky or maybe some type of a pemmican that had some fat in there, or eating nothing at all.
Yeah, I mean, you become a slave to food with carbohydrates.
100%.
And that's why being in ketosis, whether you do it through diet or intermittent fasting, enables you to be focused and have long-lasting energy all day.
Yep.
And then not reach out for those things, that quick fixes that are also toxic and damaging in the sense that you have a high sugar levels, energy, caffeine, and then drop down, or you're wired.
Right.
Whereas if you have fats, long-lasting energy, no fluctuations in energy, loads of focus, and you literally are in hunting mode.
Exactly. That's why you get the sharp focus.
Exactly. So if you want to have clarity like a hunter, be in ketosis for work, and you'll get so much more done.
Way more. And when you have that first taste of that experience, it's difficult to want to go back.
Yeah.
And if you do, because you're like, I'm out with friends, we have pizza and beer, whatever, you don't like how you feel.
Sugar
it's a quick reminder. Ooh, and it is not a fun feeling. And so suddenly you realize that what we qualified as normal for so long is absolutely not.
It's sick.
It is.
And
we're
tired.
100%.
Yeah, and broken,
Exactly. And so we are meant to be able to be, as you said, flexible early on. And in certain disease states, we may need to be primarily burning ketones to function at our most optimal, such as epilepsies. Other major neurological conditions, especially certain tumor types such as brain cancers, tend to need to probably be in or stay in some state of ketosis for the rest of their long, healthy lives to function optimally. And likely because their little mitochondria were gummed up so much and so broken and so disabled that now it has to kind of switch the pendulum all the way back to being more of a fat burner constantly than a sugar burner. But most of us, especially if we're looking at prevention or we're looking at kind of disease states that are just annoying and irritating and not life-threatening, we just need to become flexible.
Yeah. Cultivate that metabolic flexibility so that most of the time you'd be in ketosis, or at least some of the time, and then you occasionally adding healthy carbohydrates and starches, or if you want your cheat meal, that's fine. It's just what you do every day.
Exactly. Builds up.
Yeah.
Right. And the interesting thing is when you become fat adapted, when you become metabolically flexible, the thing that will surprise you the most is that you are actually always in some state of ketosis.
Even a night after some carbs, I'll swim in ketosis in the morning.
And that's what's really nice. So then you know, oh good, I should have even minimal ketones on my blood testing after a 13-hour fast overnight. That is when you know you've hit it, that you've hit your sweet zone, because that's how we should be to get up. Because you don't have that, you didn't have that guarantee that breakfast would be waiting for you after a 13-hour night in the past.
You'd have to go and hunt it first.
You'd have something on board to get you there, like it's crazy to see that,
So for optimum energy, metabolic flexibility, and sustaining yourself on fats fast, and then carbohydrates maybe in the evening, but mostly a high-fat, high-healthy fat diet would be the way to optimize your energy. But that sounds great for energy production, but how does that relate to cancer?
So what happens with cancer is the energy production is skewed from the disease process itself. So normal healthy metabolism and cancer metabolism are two different animals, and they need to be treated as such. And so when we have a cancering, and I use that verb purposefully, process, that is a metabolic aberration. We have spent the last 70 years saying that cancer is a genetic disease. I believe, as do many of my colleagues, that that might play a role in some situations, but those broken genes do not often express until the mitochondria are significantly damaged. Okay, so that is an accumulative effect of damage to the mitochondria. And the tens...
Would you call that epigenetics then?
I would. That's one of the bucket items. Mm-hmm. So what I talk about I have a book called The Metabolic Approach to Cancer, just a quick little side note, but in 27, 28 years of this journey for myself, and then helping tens of thousands of other patients, there were sort of 10 common denominators of what seemed to cause the most significant damage or disruption to the mitochondria. So I think of it as a mitochondrial bucket. And we all have a different threshold for the drops that we put into that bucket. So my threshold might be different than yours, or different than Josh's, or different than anybody else walking past us right now. But ultimately, and even the ratios of those drops in the bucket matter. And so a quick list of those 10 drops, epigenetics, the deck of cards you were dealt in this lifetime, but basically how you choose to play them is what's important.
So we all have these genes, but it's whether they're expressed or not, depending on the environment you put yourself through.
Yeah, 90 to 95% of those are dependent on what you input you put in.
And 5% is genes.
Exactly.
So it's a lot lower than you think. Just because you have a certain gene does not mean you're going to express the disease.
Perfect.
You need the environment.
Exactly. And the next drop in the bucket of the mitochondria is the metabolic motor, which we just talked about, and the fuel sources specifically, whether you're more of a fat burner or a sugar burner or a good dual carb, dual like Prius engine, or whether you are in one state predominantly or over the other. That's the next drop. The third drop is the environmental toxicants we're exposed to. You have to remember that up until the 1960s, or since the 1960s, we've had over 80,000 chemicals added to our environment, of which less than 200 have been properly tested. We're just like a giant experiment living on the planet today.
And it's hard. A
lot, because that really gums up the work of our metabolic engine. And so just an example, things like, we talk about the food, but if you're eating food that's bathed in glyphosate, known as Roundup, which is put on crops to ripen them at the same time so we get a better bushel, so we get a better outcome, so we can get a better bottom dollar, okay? That comes in and basically tells our mitochondria to just burn sugar and stay in a sugar burning, hyper-rested, endocrine disrupting state.
I thought it would.
Oh, and it has many other implications, but that's one of them. So it basically makes you diabetic, basically feeds into this process in a significant way, as well as destroys your gut microbiome and many other components. But those toxicants are significant. Plastics, for instance, they say today we eat an average of 1 credit card a month. That's disgusting. And we know well and have for some time that plastics are endocrine disruptors, and endocrine disruptors also impact our insulin and our pancreas. So they make us more, we call them diabesity, or enviro-obesity. So things from our environment are causing metabolic shifts to diabetes and obesity and endocrine disorders as well. So that also keeps us in that weird fuel source in our mitochondria. Fourth little drop in the bucket is our microbiome. We kind of started that at the beginning about how many people are entering in this world without the right inoculations. And heck, if you do make it through the birth canal and you do get on the mom's skin right away and you do breastfeed, but they're also pumping you up with massive amounts of antibiotics or vaccines that are very different in each of our bodies. We don't know how we're going to express to these things thanks to our epigenetics. That could be setting you off on the wrong course. So even if you did everything right, you still have a few more flaming hoops to go through before you really get it right.
Yeah, it's not just what you put in yourself, what you're surrounded by.
Totally. On, in, and around you on a daily basis. Mm-hmm. Number 5, our immune function. I love that we're sitting outdoors right now because most people also have pretty significant vitamin D deficiency, because we've all been made to feel terrified of the sun, and we put on so much stuff on our largest organ of absorption and elimination, our skin, that we've actually blocked the synthesis of vitamin D. So even if you are getting a good significant amount of sunshine, you're probably still low in vitamin D. And if you have certain SNPs, epigenetics, like VDR, vitamin D receptor sites, you are not utilizing that vitamin D efficiently and effectively. So you might have to add extra support to that. And if you've been eating low fat for some time, or a vegan or a vegetarian diet, or you don't like your lard and your butter and your pastured eggs, you're not getting your vitamin D there as well. And then the 6th, 7th, 8th, 9th, and 10th are things like inflammation, circulation and oxygenation, hormones, which we're swimming in a soup of hormones thanks to a lot of those chemical disruptors in our skincare products and chemicals we put into our animals and on our planet today.
In food production and agriculture.
Huge, to fatten them up, right? That's what we want. We want a good production, right? So we're also producing in ourselves. So for instance, when you fatten up a cow on corn, you're fattening up the person that's eating that cow on corn as well. And so I know a lot of folks out there in the paleo and the keto community and the carnivore community are super gung-ho about just eat whatever you can, that's better than nothing. But when you work in the cancer field like I do, I look at labs every single month and I look at what happens to insulin and insulin growth factor, which are tumor growth factors. And I will tell you, the quality of animal product makes a huge difference, and we'll adjust the labs accordingly.
That's nuts. So then are you better off looking for organic, grass-fed,
100%.
pastured, wild?
100%. Now I do tell patients, if you're making the leap from an absolute McDonald's diet, any improvement is going to help along the way. But over time, start to clean it up more and more, start to pull the reins in more and more. The more you learn, the more you can't unsee and the more you can't go back. Because in the beginning, it's not your fault, right? You don't know.
You've had the wrong information.
You've had the wrong information.
Yeah.
But once you do know, this is not what people want to hear, but then it does become your responsibility. And so you can't lie to yourself anymore when you know this information. And so if you don't like what it costs or how it is, do something about it. Get involved. This should make everyone political. This should make everyone informed. This should make everyone passionate about changing us back to what our grandparents and great-grandparents were eating. I have a sticker on my fridge that says eat organic food, or as your grandparents called it, food. What in the world?
What do we eat as food today? Looks nothing like
Not
food.
even close.
Absolutely.
Not even close. And then the final big, we've talked about the hormonal soup. The last two big ones that are often the most under discussed, although I like hearing about it here at Ancestral Health, is stress response and circadian rhythm. So there was a great talk yesterday that I missed that I'm looking forward to seeing on circadian rhythm. And so our screens are light. That's why I'm thrilled that we can be outdoors, because blue screens and EMS, I think, are the scourge of Western civilization and will likely be even more damaging from what the research is showing to our mitochondria than even the fuel sources of food we're putting into our bodies. So we need to be taking, if you're doing everything perfect and you're an amazing biohacker in all these other arenas, but you're sitting in front of a blue screen 24/7 and you're up past 11 p.m. at night trying to get your work done, you are effing up your circadian rhythm, folks, and you're making all of your systems not work well.
Because light is
we're
the
a plant.
source of energy.
We're just a big house plant. You need to feed and water us appropriately and get us the right light.
Sunlight, water, and then food.
Thank you. Exactly. I think that's actually, I like that. I think that even light is almost the number one priority. And so if you can get yourself, these are the things that are free. You know, get outside the first and last light of the day, even if it's raining, even if it's cloudy. Those spectrum is coming through those clouds to bathe your cells and to stimulate the hypothalamic pituitary adrenal axis and the pineal gland, and our entire circadian clock comes to life. But if you're starting your day first thing, rolling out of bed, you know, looking at a blue screen before getting out in that sunlight, you've already sold yourself short for how your day can unfold. And so I really encourage people, spend that first hour outdoors, even if it's bundled up in a blanket in the dead of winter with a cup of tea, looking at the sunrise, even if it's through clouds, can do an enormous amount of good for your body.
And for the energy that you have throughout the day.
Exactly, it's so restorative. And if you do need a fix, instead of going to grab that donut or that cup of coffee, take a brisk walk, even 5 minutes outdoors, get that fresh air. If you're by the water, get to the negative ions along the ocean, go lay on the earth for a moment, for crying out loud. Oh my gosh, it's so good.
Grounded.
Exactly, and the final 10th drop in that bucket, which is impacted by all of these other drops we've talked about, and impacts those drops, is our mental, emotional, and spiritual well-being. And I'm presenting tomorrow on longevity. And I'll give a little bit of detail away here that the United States, for the third year in a row, is falling behind in our survival rate compared to other developed countries in the world. So where everybody else in the world has an 80.3-year survival rate, the US every year for the past 3 years is dropping. We're now at 77.6 years as our survival rate. And the number one cause of that many scientists would agree, is actually that of despair. Despair. And
that is so
it's right?
Sad, so
you just hear that, and the two ways that plays out that have made our mortality higher than all of these other countries is through opiates, which are, you know, your painkillers, because you can't deal with the pain of life, so you got to take your painkillers, and suicide. That should be telling folks something. And when you think about the origins of depression, anxiety, despair, disconnect. In my world, that is cancer. That's like at the metabolic cellular level. And cancer in many people is an incredible opportunity to change everything in your life and wake up and reset all of those rhythms and patterns within your body and being. But when we keep reaching for the things that made us sick, the drug, the sugar,
more and more, and the cortisol, the stress, everything.
Or even chemo and radiation that we use to treat those. Not to say don't do those, but please be aware you have to do a heck of a lot more to overcome that. There's something missing. And so you need to start to explore your own bucket. What drops are going in there? What can you do to enhance the cleanliness of that bucket, to change the mitochondrial machinery, to give you the vigor and vim that you need. Tomorrow I'll actually be talking about the symptoms of mild mitochondrial damage and the symptoms of extreme mitochondrial damage. And I think you and your listeners will be surprised to hear that that's the main symptoms of the main diseases that we as clinicians see every day in our offices.
All of the time. It's just not giving yourself the right energy that you can utilize for energy.
Exactly.
If you could give people get people to make one change in their lives to improve their energy levels, what would it be?
Oh, it's so hard for one because I see them connected.
Things.
Okay, well, here's a good example. I lost one of the closest people in my life in the last week and a half he was out doing actually what he loved. Music, concerts, being out in nature was what Brad lived for, besides his daughters and his wife. Those were the joy factors in his world. And he had a terrible fall that cracked open his skull, and they couldn't. No, well, this is important because it's like what I got to see of Brad's life is he was doing what he loved and died at 47 years old, leaving behind all these other people. But he was doing absolutely what he loved, and he leaves behind other people that, because of that horrific loss, pushes us to continue to do what we love. So when I talk to patients that are struggling, either in despair, whether it's from depression, epilepsy, diabetes, cancer, osteoporosis, cardiovascular disease, I ask them 3 questions. What brings you joy? For what are you grateful? And what did you come here to do? What is your purpose and passion? And when I look at Brad's life as short and quickly snuffed out, I get goosebumps and it makes me very emotional. This man inhaled all 3 of those things on a regular basis, inhaled them. And he shows us that, any of us have that opportunity at any given moment. And so finding that joy, maybe it is taking a walk in nature. Maybe it is, playing with a child. Maybe it is going to a conference that fires you up and gets you among your tribe.
Find what you love doing and do it with whom you love.
Exactly. Yeah. That is such incredible information given to your cells that help change that sort of mitochondrial factory from the get-go. Because again, as I said earlier, if you are eating perfectly and you're working out perfectly and you're doing these things, but you're not getting enough rest, or you're not doing it with the people that you love, you have to bring all the pieces together.
Thank you so much for your time, Nasha. That was really wonderful, and I love that you ended on the joy and doing what you love.
Absolutely.
It comes first with the mindset. But just thank you so much for your time today, and I can't wait to see your talk tomorrow.
Thank you, and thank you because you're clearly living your joy, purpose, and passion.
Oh, thank you.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you.